Welcome to the Oxa podcast, where we discuss science-based breathing tools and practices to optimize your health. Hi everyone, I'm your host, Matthew Chafford, biomedical engineer and health tech podcaster. Our guest today is Xavier De Le Rue, an iconic snowboarder, 4 times Boardercross World Champion, 3 times Freeride World Tour Champion, having made significant contributions to his sport through his pioneering expeditions and movies, including Mission Antarctic and Degrees North, known for their vertiginous sequences and the use of innovative shooting techniques such as drones and paramotors. In this conversation, we talk with Xavier about managing fear and risk in extreme situations, the psychology involved, and how breathwork can facilitate decision-making in high-intensity events. He shares about his relationship with fear, how a terrible avalanche accident in 2008 transformed his approach to risk management, and the way he's been preparing for his outings in the big mountains ever since. We also touch on how Xavier discovered breathwork and the types of breathing practices he's been using when competing in Boardercross or before dropping the helicopter to go down a risky line. This conversation is a fascinating dive into the world of snowboarding and into the mind of an iconic figure of his generation, in love with nature and the limits it imposes. Before we jump right in, I'd like to add that this episode is brought to you by Oxa, the first wearable with live biofeedback and your coach for enhanced sleep and stress relief. Oxa measures in real time your vitals, like your heart and respiratory rates, and creates personalized breathing exercises for you to control stress and get better sleep. Head over to oxalife.com, that's OXALIFE.com, for more details on how Oxa can help you live a healthier life. And now, here's our conversation with Xavier De Le Rue. So what drew you to the world of extreme sports, doing all these, high-risk activities? Can you share with us where is this coming from?
Yeah, it's funny because, already calling it extreme sports is kind of something quite difficult. What is extreme sports? I think for me, the original idea was to be in the nature, kind of in a way, in an environment where you don't have full control, where you're basically a little thing which needs to adapt to much greater things, to much greater powers. I don't know. I think from a very early age on, I could see big mountains and I was drawn by them.
Can you remember what was maybe like the first time you went into like the mountains and did like something risky? Like what's your first memory of having some kind of degree of like fear or saying yourself to yourself, well, this is, a risky move?
It's hard to say, but I don't know. I remember anything I did when I was a kid, I liked to push it a little bit. I remember when I was maybe 11, 12, we started building these huge tree houses in the forest. And I remember quite crazy. I remember also being on my skis when I was around that age, like 10, 11 years old, and jumping huge cliffs into the powder already and things like this. So I don't really remember one day where I told myself, okay, this is what I want to do, because it's always been what I wanted to do.
And for snowboarding, how did you come into snowboarding?
And snowboarding came a bit by mistake, basically, because my older brother started snowboarding. He started skateboarding and then snowboarding, and he was, you should start. And he became really good. And of course, you always want to do like your bigger brother. So I followed and I liked it. And there was a really nice group in our village where we were all the same age, and we had an incredible guy that took us under his wing. And it started there without having any objective, any goals whatsoever, just wanting to have fun and discover life. And it's been, I think, the best years of my life.
So kind of like 30 or even maybe like 40 years, onwards, you're now, one of the most accomplished, snowboarders, and you've done some extreme and, very, I think you've progressed the field in a way that, many others are, I think, grateful for and look with a lot of respect. There is obviously a parameter, and that's kind of like what we wanted to discuss in the conversation, which is the fear, how to manage fear. And I think in your case, you certainly have some particular relationship with fear. So I'd be curious to explore, what the nature of this relationship is. It's certainly, an integral part of your work, of your performance, from, the very first activities you've done to some of the most extreme ones. Yes, I'd be curious to understand what your relationship to fear is, and how do you turn it into something that's ultimately, limiting the risks of what you do. And I'd be curious to hear how you approached it.
Many questions there. I need to. Now, well, already there's this big saying in freeriding is like, well, you've probably heard it. It's like a good snowboarder is an old snowboarder in a way, because you, as I was saying before, it's a sport where you evolve on a terrain and on an element that's like uncontrollable. Like as much as you know it, it's always something where you're going to be, I don't know, 95, 98% sure, but never 100%. So that brings in kind of a different mindset to any other sports, because you know that you never control everything. So first of all, I think it's already quite important, I find, to grasp that and to really understand that, yeah, it's not your element. You're not meant to be there. And yeah, once again, if the mountains decide to, if she's not happy with you, she'll let you know in a second, and it's going to hurt very much. So yeah, that brings an element which is quite hard to deal with. So it's fear, but also, like whenever you start getting into it, you see things, and you see accidents or close calls or situations where you got out of it, but you realized that you had no control whatsoever. And if like something had changed a little bit, you would have been in such trouble. It's hard to process because, when you're young, you know everything better than everyone, and then you get some of these close calls and things, and you try to get the good things, but at the same time, you don't want to be broken into your drive and your progression. You realize and you admit that, like, yeah, there's a part of the sport that you don't control and that you have a bit of fear. And then eventually you actually realize that, yeah, fear is actually part of the process. And that the fear is a really good indicator in a way of, like whether you're pushing it too much or not. And I think that for me, it's always been really, really clear that I needed to cultivate that fear and to use it. Like for me, the biggest thing that has happened to me was like in 2008, I got taken into this huge avalanche, which took me down over 2 kilometers down a mountain. So the kind of avalanche which you don't survive. So basically the lesson of my life. And after that, like, of course, my first reaction was to want to quit, like to stop. Like I was like, what am I doing? I was already a young father, and I thought I was completely irresponsible. And then
you were 29, right?
29. You're right. Yeah, and it made me be like, okay. At first, yeah. So I was like, okay, this is completely stupid. And then after a few days, I remember being in my hospital room and looking up the mountains, and the sky was blue. The mountains were filled with snow, and I surprised myself basically reading lines on all the mountains around the hospital. And I was like, oh my God, after what happened, you're still doing that? Like, what are you doing? Oh, maybe you actually really, really like what you're doing. Like, and then, I got the whole summer after that to think about it and to process everything, to try to find a way to being able to be, in a way, more safe when I was doing my sport, like to continue doing it and have a level of risk which was acceptable in a way. And so one of the lessons in there was clearly, okay, very often in the mountains, it's just so beautiful. It's like so pure. You're on your own, like with your friends, like there's no one around. Like the mountains in winters are like, they've got this power that is like indescribable. Everything is like beautiful. Like the snow gives a texture to those mountains that's like beautiful. The light is beautiful. And it's just so hard whenever it's a powder day to not be completely crazy, to not just want to scream and like the last thing you want to think of is danger.
Yeah, risk.
And I felt like, especially after that accident, that this was the number one problem. And for me to counter this, to not fall into that trap, I was like, okay, from today on, I will always force myself to have fear. Whatever I do, I'll try to cultivate my fear. So I try to be like, okay, this is bad. This could be bad. This could be bad. So try to see the negative in everything, like try to analyze like that pocket of snow, the potential rocks, the thing. And at first I thought, oh, this is boring. I don't want to be thinking that way. But
overthinking, yeah.
Yeah, but then I realized that fear made me be actually really focused and really present on the moment and really be aware of what could potentially arrive my way. And even though it was not necessarily enjoyable, I thought that this was the price to pay to being able to continue like my activity the way I did it.
Before we go into maybe to understand, what are the strategies and the tactics you've put in place to, what changed after that accident. You mentioned in one of the previous interviews you've done that I listened to when I was preparing the interview, you talk about like the good fear and the bad fear. Can you share with us, what you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because it's true that we all feel that thing where you're doing something and all of a sudden you're like completely petrified and you cannot act and you cannot do anything. And on the other hand, like we've all felt sometimes that we were pushing maybe a little too much and that we were scared, but at the same time for a good reason, So in my way, I kind of pictured it as like the good and the bad fear, and that it was always good to try to differentiate the one from the other, to being able to be like, okay, now you're scared, but there's a good reason to be scared there, because it's actually dangerous. You're doing something stupid, and the fear is telling you the right thing. So go back, go back home. And on the other hand, sometimes, you've got fear, but it's the fear which is, just because your head is just running. You just see yourself falling, or you're just thinking of too many things, like maybe your brain is taken by like some bills you have to take, or by some stupid things at home, and your head is not there, and you're in the mountains and you're scared, but you're actually not scared for any reason. So I think it's nice to being able to always analyze why you're scared. And for me, it's like, is that a good fear or a bad fear? And that helps me be like, okay, put it aside, or actually listen to it. It's giving you a good lesson, and act accordingly.
I think one thing you have to deal with in your sport, and I guess in the mountains in general, is, even though you've got to the peak, like you decide to stop or you decide to withdraw because there's a level of risk that's, above the threshold that you set yourself. How do you make those decisions? Or, in the context of these two types of fears, like, can you share with us maybe like an example that recently happened that made you withdraw? Because that's showing let's say the certain degree of wisdom and being rational about the level of risk, and being also like transparent towards it.
I think it's a very, very personal way of approaching it, kind of like we all see it in a different way. First of all, it's really important to know that in what we do in freeriding, you turn back very, very often. So it's like very often that you go to the top of your line, even if it's taken you maybe a whole day or several days, or it's been maybe a few years that you try to do this one line and the conditions are not right, you turn back. And at the beginning, it's really, really difficult. And for me, it took one big accident, which I was talking before, to actually have the strength after to being able to be like, no, it's not good. I turn back. And then to realize that you are actually still doing amazing things, even though sometimes you were turning back, but you were doing it in much more sustainable way. I think I've developed like a sort of routine whenever I'm filming, whenever I'm in the mountains. So it's kind of a behavior that has appeared throughout all my experiences and throughout my life and stuff. I always try to, whenever I prepare a line, because basically lines are not something you see and you're like, oh, let's go, boom. There's always a process to it. First of all, you're going to try to gather as much information from everything that's around you. So you're going to try to write small lines around, or if you're just hiking this one big peak, for example, you're going to walk, like tour around, go in different aspects, try to read everything. So you collect informations and you kind of put them in your head. And then whenever you have your objective, I realize really that I usually analyze it, like the first part of the analyze of the line. You're going to see your line and analyze it in a really rational way. So it's going to be, I think it's the right part of your brain, or it might be the left, one or the other, basically. But basically, I really try to be like, okay, black or white. Okay, this cone is boom. Okay, this rock here. Okay, this thing. Try to analyze all these different aspects. And then once again with what's the worst thing that can happen? So I try to, boom, put all this information kind of in my Excel file in my brain. And then for a while, like I try to see like the bottom line to see, okay, with all those aspects, with all those different like crux kind of in a way, like, is there a solution? Is there a way to make it like, which is kind of reasonable? Yes, no. So usually I take a first decision there. And then once that job is done, I kind of put this process aside, and then I try to think completely with my feelings, without thinking, I try to be like, okay, how do you feel? Like, what's your gut feeling inside you? Like, do you feel happy about it? Do you feel excited? Do you feel scared? Do you feel empowered? Like, do you have a bad feeling, something nasty? And I try to listen to that, but in a second stage. And then like usually that helps me decide if I give the full green light or not. And then, yeah, whenever I'm going to be at the start, at the top of the line, on the moment to drop, all that work will kind of just be stored in my head. And I will have taken the decision according to it. And then I'll just go. But really, all this part of preparation is basically where everything happens, where all the decisions that you're going to be taking later on, like while you're doing your run, they will have been taken already before when you were preparing it. And I think that's the thing that people don't see when they see all those videos, like all that process, all that preparation in a way. Yeah.
I think there was one element you mentioned that I think is an important call out. So when we see those movies that you make, or movies, I was thinking about a movie with Travis Rice that you might know, The Art of Flight. Is that a movie? So first you always think that they make it to the top and then they go down. You don't see the moments where they decide not to go. And I think that's an important call out. And then you mentioned, this decision-making process before you decide to go. And my following question would be, once you are going down, how do you, like, you're not like, I don't know, when I watch these movies, sometimes I'm like, these guys have no brains and you have to be really crazy to do what they do.
That's exactly the feedback we get all the time when you show movies, like, you're crazy, you're crazy.
Yeah, but so when you are actually going down, you still have a part that's, you're kind of like reading where you're going to go, and you're also like anticipating potential risks. Can you explain us, how those mechanisms work when you're actually going down?
Well, for me, I find that when you're going down, everything happens so quickly and there are so many things happening everywhere that you don't really have time to think. So I find that if you haven't done the job before to being even thinking that there could be this one danger that this slab could go, like when the slab is going to release below you, it's going to happen so quickly that it's going to be almost impossible to go and exit and hide yourself somewhere. Oh, it's breaking. Oh, what do we do? Oh, I need to look for an exit. Oh, where's the exit? Like, okay, you're gone. Whereas, like, if you've been thinking before, oh, this could be one potential danger. So if this breaks, well, I could go and hide here. And the real danger of it could pull me down through those cliffs. So that's really, that should never happen. And boom. Just the fact of having thought about it will make that when you're going to be riding it and this happens, even your subconscious will take over and will take the right decision. Because I find that it's just too hard, and it's something that I've always really, really loved. Like the state of mind that you get into when you ride a line, because it's so intense and you've like put yourself so much into it that I find that every time, like the pressure has been so intense, like on the preparation phase, at the top, with the film crew and everything, that you're like, hyped to the max, and stressed to the max as well, and scared, and like all this really hard feeling. And then boom, you start dropping into your line and you do your first set. And always, I love that, like you enter this bubble and like, of course, you hear these kind of stories from any kind of different sports, but I love it because it like everything becomes automatic kind of in a way. And I always feel when I'm in that state of mind that you feel like you're in an animal where you know exactly what you need to do, you're not thinking, everything happens by itself. And I really, really love it. And it's like, it doesn't happen super easily to get into that process. I find that the more energy you're going to put into your preparation, into the visualization of your run, and also the more the run itself is going to be an intense one, the more you're going to get that feeling. So that's maybe one reason why we're like so drawn into these like things which seem unattainable, these lines that seem completely crazy, because like that search for yourself is like immense, I find. Yeah.
Let's say I would say the recovery phase, or the phase where you've completed the run. Can you explain us how you do like any retrospective or like feedback with people you've done the run with? What do you take out of like a successful or any type of run once you're done?
Well, I don't think we analyze like kind of in the same way that traditional sports would be like with your coach, you see you run and see what we could have done better. But yeah, for sure, it's so intense. And usually when you're in the mountains, you're with someone else that is doing another line next to you. So for sure, you're going to be sharing so much your feelings and things. And like that kind of communication is super important also in the mountains to, like share information about what he found in his line, what you found in your line, and what was scary, what was not, because that will help you for the next line over. And also it will help you getting better, because like that whole free riding, the whole mountains, and especially on snow, is so complex and it has so many elements to it that you constantly need to talk about it and try to evolve.
And the fact that you mentioned that you had one daughter when you had the big avalanche accident in 2008, now you have, I think, 2 more, so you have like 3 kids. How does your, having this role of father, having gone through that traumatic experience, how has this changed your relationship to fear? Do you think, are you also very risk averse for your kids? Like, do you also tell them, not to do things that you would have done yourself?
No, I don't think you would call me a risk adverse father. I'm like, no, I really feel that taking risk is so important in life. And especially for young children, and like I really teach them to fall, to learn from themselves. Like when they fall, they should get up and try again. They should find their own limits, and I've done that like her whole life with Mila, and now it's nice because I can see the result, and I can see how she's able to adapt herself to any sports, any situation, and I'm doing that with the girls because I find it's so important. And especially our society, I find, is just, driving the kids to just be in front of screens and not to take any risk. Everything must be controlled. And life is not like this, I find it. And I think the mountains is one of the last environments where you're actually up there, you're responsible for yourself. Your decisions will mean if you have an accident or not. And I think it's so nice, like compared to that risk adverse society that we have. And I think for children, it's even more true. So I try to cultivate that for myself, for my own children. And if I can also, if I can inspire kids to get out there and to try to get that feeling also, I'm all for it.
Yeah. And I guess, in a way, people, face difficulties one way or another. So you better be equipped with what you might learn, through those experiences. I'd like to switch gears to the topic of breathwork, because that's what, that's the main subject of this podcast, where we try to understand a bit, what are some of the tools, or what are some of what's actually the power of breathwork and where it can serve in different circumstances. So we talked about fear in the context of your sport and your experience. First question regarding breathwork I wanted to ask you was, how did you come to breathwork? How did you discover it? Where is this coming from? Was that something that you learned from other snowboarders from a completely different sphere? Yeah, I'll be curious to hear how you came about it.
It's really interesting because I think breathwork was never a thing ever in my sport. Like throughout all the coaching, all the, like even Olympic coaching and everything, I never heard anything related to
about
that.
Breathwork.
And I remember, like, first of all, very young, like when I was 14, 15, I always remember that at the start, like at the start of a competition, that's where I could feel, there was something happening. I was like either like trying to calm myself or excite myself. Like I could feel that really. And I remember that I used it subconsciously, but also eventually it became a conscious choice. And then later on, I discovered yoga. I never did too much yoga, but I always did a little bit, like, and I still do today, but I'm not a super yogi kind of person. But I really realized what it does to me. Like, how much it makes my brain clear, my body feeling better, my mood. And then from doing it, I realized that it wasn't necessarily the moves, but it was more the breathing that did that. And so, connecting those two things together really made me realize how important and how powerful breathing can be. And also, I would say that, between 20 and 35, I was climbing a lot. And I really felt as well, climbing, in climbing, how much, it's such an intense activity and how, like, you absolutely needed to breathe in the right way, more so than in free riding or in any other sports which I was doing. Otherwise, you would fall. Like, you needed to be relaxed, but at the same time have the power, and like you needed to adapt throughout the different phases of your route. And like, it was very, very obvious in that sport as well. So I learned kind of throughout the way. There's never been anyone that has really told me you should do this. I wish there was, because it's such a powerful tool. Yeah, nowadays it's less important. I'm less performance dependent, but to feel better, it's one of my very, very important tools.
You mentioned, the preparation of a competition where you had some degree of stress or some degree of excitement because of what was going to happen. Can you share an experience, where breathwork, directly influence your ability to kind of like navigate a challenging or dangerous situation, or, any kind of situation where you thought it was quite relevant?
I don't have like one particular moment, because every single competition and I would say every single big line that I've done, like breathing was a major part of it. And like sometimes, especially in competition, I would say that I was really looking for for getting pumped. And I know that like this short, like freaking breath was like helping me a ton. And I remember that, I was doing it and like moving at the same time. And that was kind of my way to get pumped and to get into gear and to get ready for fight, ready for action. And then I would say that like at the top of a freeride line, it would be different. It would be more like kind of grounding myself, trying to not really, calm myself in a way, but like, being really grounded, present, like opening my mind. And I remember that it was always, and it's still today, like more long breath, like more calming, like more try to breathe a lot, try to oxygenate also myself, like to being able to be more alert, I think.
I guess this is also part of the decision-making process, whether you go for it or you don't go for it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's part of those good or bad feelings. Like, sometimes you can feel that your brain is glued, kind of, is like it's not functioning properly, and you can feel that you're not alert. And and it's so hard because you're stressed at the same time, and you might be tired because it might have been hard to get to the top of your line or something. And it's really hard to know if you should get going or not. And I know that like breathing is definitely a huge key for me to switch from that mode to get into like, okay, boom, I'm ready, I know what I need to do, I'm committed, and I'm going. Beyond
these two types of breathing patterns, so one being like more, let's say, longer exhales to, calm yourself down and be in that reflective state to make a decision, versus the high rhythm breathing patterns that you described to get pumped and motivated and in a way like bring up the adrenaline before you go for a competition. Is there like another breathwork practice that you've implemented that you would like to share with the listeners, or that you would recommend to anyone who was actually not really into that?
I think like the only like practice that I've done a lot is the Wim Hof breathing, because I find it's like not too long. I remember it was like maybe 3-4 years ago with my wife. We were doing it like quite often, like especially waking up. It would really like help us like oxygenate the brain and everything, and it was really amazing. I've stopped doing it recently actually, and I think that this is the one that I've stuck with for the longest. And then what I've done maybe for 15 years and that I still do today is like every morning I do a 7-minute yoga routine. That's very basic, that has a lot of sun salutation, that has really rapid moves, and that is basically breathing. Yeah. And that makes me feel good and ready and in a good mood. Like every day, it's like pretty insane.
What's the relationship now from, let's say, the snowboarding community or the spheres in which you gravitate regarding breathwork? Is this something you're trying to, that you share with a lot of your peers? Yet you see is gaining adopted? Is there, or I'd be curious to know what's your take?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel that breathwork, like gets to the point more with older people, I find. Like younger people, it's really hard to convince them and to get them into the mood. Like, for example, my daughter, like she's 18, she's fully into competition. And I tell her about it and it's like, And I remember with my younger brother, Victor, who's 10 years younger than me, same, when he was in his early 20s, he was like, yeah, whatever. He was just into like, whatever, like I'm doing my thing and that's it. And I really feel that it's something for 30 and above, but maybe I'm wrong. Like, I don't know. I wish I could try to transmit how much it helps and how how much it's a good tool, which like you completely underestimate like the powers of, but it's not always possible.
Yeah, no, I think with age, you probably also are more, let's say, likely to adhere or to understand a bit what the benefits are. And I think when you're young, breathing, well, yes, you breathe, you're healthy, like you don't have any problems. It's a given. And I guess in different sports, it's really part of the sport. Like I was thinking about biathlon, for example, when they have to stop, they have to shoot, they have to stop breathing. That's we're recording during the Olympics, you see these guys doing like archery or like bow shooting. And I mean, they have to be in a state where they are like so focused. There's no movement beyond just like, triggering the arrow. And I guess in those sports, like that's probably fully part of their training. You talked about your daughters, you talked about your brother. You're part of a family of, I think it's 5 siblings, 4 guys, one girl. You're all, I guess, related to snowboarding or to skiing to some degree. We mentioned Victor, who is now, competing in the Freeride World Tour and being, let's say, following your path in a way. I wanted to talk about, transmission and, how do you accompany younger snowboarders or aspiring free riders based on your knowledge, your experience? I'm asking not only for breathwork, but in general, how do you see your role in that regard?
Well, I feel that, I've had such an amazing life with snowboarding, with free riding, with the mountains that, I feel that it's my duty, and I feel so inspired if I'm able to inspire actually younger people to get into it, to get out there, to get out of their homes and just try to be in nature and love it. So first of all, the more I can do it, the better I feel. And specifically to freeriding, I felt, especially in the last 5 years, that, I had been showing for so many years like this super rad action, like super dangerous things, like super extreme and big achievements. And I felt that it was kind of a bit my duty to also share what I had learned around it. And I think one of the biggest aspects is safety. And it's one aspect, once again, that people don't necessarily want to hear about. And it's something that's super important, that's super crucial in that sport. So I've developed this series, which I did for quite a few years, was trying to give away as much as all my little tricks and my way of seeing things and all the little techniques and stuff to try to inspire people and to become better. But whatever I can do, I'm happy to.
So you're referring to this How to XV series on YouTube. Yeah, we'll put the links in the show notes. Is there something particular you try to convey to them when you talk about like risks and safety? Like, do you take some of your like younger guys with you on a run, or how do you ensure that beyond, let's say, the content that you produce in that regard, like in a very practical way, how do you transmit what you know and what can be helpful, or even like potentially a matter of life and death in certain situations?
Yeah, it's hard. I don't take very many people because my seasons are super busy, like to try, well, like with the different filming project, you need to be kind of a bit on call all the time to try to get the good conditions, because it's, in a season, there's your whole season, basically your whole shooting is going to be made in a few days, but to get those few days, you need to be constantly like traveling somewhere, trying, the snow is too dangerous there, you travel somewhere else, you try, the snow is bad, and then eventually boom, you get those magic days and you score everything and it works. If you have too many commitments around, well, you're not going to be able to be very successful into your filming. So it's hard for me to find the time to go out there with kids. And here there's an amazing Freeride World Tour like club where my daughter goes. They're out there all the time, and it's really hard to find time to go with them. But I know this time will come when my career slows down a bit and I can go and do that. But I feel that the content is the most powerful thing to transmit already, like to the maximum amount of people. And of course, when I go and ride with people, I try to educate a bit on okay, like there you should have, like it would have been better to do this. If you do this could happen and stuff. But that's it's not the most effective way to kind of spread the message. But any info I can give, I'm happy to. Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to touch on with you, Xavier, is I know you're also very engaged regarding climate and global warming topics and sustainability and, protecting the environment. I think this probably, comes from the fact that you've spent so much time in nature, that you love nature. We're recording, in Verbier now. It's like really in the middle of the mountains. How do you see the future of the sport in that regard? Do you think it's going to be limited to certain locations where it's only going to be possible under, let's say, a certain level of safety or under a certain quality of snow? How do you see that? Because in your 25-year, even longer career, you've probably seen some evolutions, or you probably snowboarded in places where now it's not really possible anymore.
Yeah, completely. I think with the snow, you can really see the direct effect of like global warming. And of course, if you say in 20, 30 years, we're not going to be able to ski, it's one thing. You're like, oh, poor rich people. But like the consequences of that will be like way beyond the fact of skiing or not skiing. But yeah, I think for us, seeing, for example, the glaciers that are in front of our eyes every day, like retrieving in like such a fast way, it's something which is undeniable. And like we see, like, because we're so dependent on the snow conditions and like we're constantly checking the weather, the conditions and things. And like even in a period of 10 years, like the evolution is crazy. And we've all been clearly witnessing wherever we live in the world nowadays that, yeah, like the weather is becoming a lot more like complicated and erratic, kind of, where it goes like it snows, like 15 meters in California when it's like dry the whole winter here in Verbier, and vice versa, and forest fires and Antarctica melting at a crazy rate, and etc., etc. I think we all hear about it. Everybody knows about it. But in terms of snow quality, so of course you can see that low resorts, they have it's only a matter of time till they're not going to be able to open anymore. I think the high resorts, they have like quite a few decades ahead of them, if you can say. But for me, I find that in the activity, okay, maybe the season is a bit less regular than it used to be, but I find that the fact of having like the snow level going higher, I find that here, at least in the Alps, I find that the stability of the snow becomes better, especially in the higher stuff. Whenever, it's warmer throughout the whole season, it will rain higher, and above that rain level, it will be really stable snow. So in a way, that makes it more stable in some ways, but that's a very selfish way to see the problem. But I think we all need to be ready to have more and more crazy like seasons happening. And there might be seasons which are completely nuts with so much snow and not. So I think it's just a lot less predictable than it used to be. Like to summarize a bit, it's just that we need to be ready to adapt ourselves to whatever come our way, because it's going to be unpredictable. I mean, there's some beauty into that, like we can always be dramatic about it, but we're humans and we're here only for a certain amount of time, and we have a beautiful present of nature, so we need to embrace it and love it and go out there and play with it, because it's amazing.
These are like some nice closing words. I wanted to thank you for your time and for accepting our invitation. I think it was very interesting to talk about risks, fear, breathwork, how you approached it as a freeride snowboarder. Like I never thought I would have had the opportunity to have that conversation with you. You were probably one of the snowboarders. I do snowboarding, but I've like the snowboard one, which is like the basic education for it, and I don't do extreme stuff. But I watched lots of your movies, lots of your videos when I was in junior high school, even at the beginning of my studies. So I have a lot of respect for what you do. So thank you so much, Xavier.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I hope I can share the good words, because it's important. I love what I do. I'm very inspired, and I really wish everyone to being able to discover that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our conversation with Xavier De Le Rue, where we discuss managing fear and risk in extreme situations and how breathwork might help in such situations. To learn more about and explore the resources that Xavier mentioned, check out the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode of the Oxa Podcast, subscribe on YouTube or your preferred listening platform, and give us feedback via email using podcast@oxalive.com or in the comment section. Feel free to share topic suggestions for the next episodes, as well as guest recommendations. If you know someone who would benefit from today's conversation, please share the episode with this person. As an additional way to support the show, you can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps us a lot in bringing the podcast forward. Thanks again for listening to today's episode and for your interest in the science of breathing.